We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is August the 10th, 2024. Just got off work. Just another day, another dollar, another day. Nothing new. So today we're doing a Leave the World Behind episode with commentary. Chapter 22. Let's get into it. So he'd been gone for 45 minutes. It meant he'd stopped to smoke. It meant he'd stopped for groceries. Amanda. What, me? Worry? Ruth put a bowl of cherries, more black than red, onto the table. It had the air of ceremony. Thank you. Amanda didn't know why she was thanking the woman. Hadn't she spent $11 on these cherries? A cloud, one of those soft, cottony ones, all curves like a child's drawing, seeped across the sky. The change was severe enough that G.H. shivered. I could almost use a minute in the hot tub. Amanda took this for an invitation. She left the table, sank into the froth beside this strange man. The water made you buoyant, and so it made it hard to sit. Amanda leaned forward to look toward the trees. She could not see the children any longer. They're fine, I expect, George understood. You had a child and were forever vigilant. There's nothing back there but more trees. Ruth looked at the two of them. Wine with lunch had made her drowsy. I might make some coffee then. That would be nice, love. Thank you. Amanda smiled. Can I do anything? You relax. Ruth went back into the house. The pool, the hot tub, they cost a fortune in electric bills. We're going to have solar panels put up. I didn't want to do it during the season when we use the house. I'm waiting until September, October. My contractor told me he generates enough that he sells power back to the grid. More people should do that. G.H. was almost beginning to enjoy this woman's company. He liked an audience. Clean energy should save the planet. Should be a law. So there you go. Getting into the whole clean energy, quote unquote clean energy. All that jazz. Global warming, climate change. Pushing a narrative. Sometimes at the movie theater on the sidewalk, Amanda would see wind energy I can't pronounce it, with pamphlets and free buttons, but it always seemed like a scam. How do you get into your line of work? More small talk. I had a mentor in college. It was him who made me, I didn't know what people did for a living. My mother ran a hair salon. His tone conveyed his respect for his mother's work. She died of cancer, liver, stomach, pancreas, probably from handling the chemicals women like her to use to make their hair respectable. Stephen Johnson, gone now, but what a life. I guess it's like having a green thumb, or being good at doing the Rubik's Cube. Some people can make money, some people can't. She knew who she and Clay were. This was one of G.H.'s hobby horses. That's the conventional wisdom. You have to ask yourself why that is. Who wants you to believe that it's not possible to get, if not rich, at least comfortable? It's a skill. You can be taught. It's just about information. You have to read the paper. You have to listen to what is happening in the world. Of course, he thought you had to be smart, but he considered that a given. I read the paper. She was a woman of the world, she believed. She wanted to say something about her work, but there was little to say. You only have to understand the patterns that govern the world. Did you ever hear about the guy who beat the game show, Press Your Luck? G.H. looked down at her over the rims of his Ray-Bans. He wanted a newspaper now. He thought of the numbers. He wondered what had moved. Whammy? No whammy? All he did was pay attention and learn that whammy wasn't random at all. It always appeared in a certain sequence. That information was just there, but no one had ever bothered to look for it. Rich people didn't have a moral authority. They just knew where the whammy was. That's interesting, she said, indicating that she did not find it at all. Where were the kids? I'm glad to be away from my work for the moment. Don't get me wrong, it's interesting, to me anyway. Helping people tell the stories of their companies, helping them find consumers, making that connection. But it's a lot of diplomacy. It gets tiring. George went on. My mentor was one of the first black men at a Wall Street firm. We had lunch one afternoon. Lunch. I was 21. How to communicate that he'd never previously considered eating lunch at a restaurant. Never mind one like that. Carpeted, mirrored, brass ashtrays, celatitious uniformed girls in ponytails. He'd showed up without a tie, and Stephen Johnson took him to Bloomingdale's, bought him 4 from Ralph Lauren. G.H. hadn't known how to put them on. The ones he'd worn at Christmas were clip-on. I've always thought that women needed to stick together in the workforce, or maybe everywhere. I'd been nowhere without my mentors. This was not entirely true. Amanda had worked for women, but secretly preferred working with men. Their motivations were so simple. He said to me, "We're all machines." That's it. You get to choose the nature of the machine you are. We are all machines. But some of us are smart enough that we get to determine our programming. What he'd said, fools believe rebellion is possible. Capital determines everything. You can either calibrate yourself to that, or think you've rejected it. But the latter, Stephen Johnson said, was a delusion. You were either going to get rich or not. You only had to choose. Stephen Johnson and he were the same kind of person. He was not who he was: patriarch, intellect, husband, collector of fine watches, first-class traveler. Because he'd chosen to be. Amanda was lost. They were talking around each other now, not to each other. You must love what you do. Did he care about it, or had he come to care about it, as the spouses in an arranged marriage find, over time, a transaction settled into something like affection? I'm a lucky man. The heat was clarifying in the way of orgasm, akin to blowing your nose. The hot sun, the hot water, but still this energy. She could have run around the block, or taken a nap, or done pull-ups. She was waiting for Clay to drive up the road. It had been an hour, right? She listened for the sound of the car. They should leave. If they timed it right, they'd be home for dinner. They could treat themselves to one of the neighborhood restaurants that was just slightly too expensive to be a regular haunt. She didn't know, of course, that Clay had the same thought. She didn't know this bespoke how well suited to each other they were. The yard was quiet for the steamy undulation of the tub. She looked at the woods, and she thought she saw something moving, but couldn't pick out their bodies. She thought a mother should be able to do that. Once upon a time, but then she'd actually taken the toddlers to the playground and lost them immediately. A sea of small humanity that had nothing to do with her. She was happy the children had each other. Were still children enough to get lost in their games, tromping through the woods like she imagined country kids did. She was sitting there, not doing anything more, when it happened, when there was something, a noise, but that didn't cover it. Noise was an insufficient noun, or maybe noise was always impossible to describe in words. What was music but noise? Could words get at Beethoven? This was a noise, yes, but one so loud that it was almost a physical presence. So sudden because, of course, there was no president. There was nothing. Real life. And then there was a noise. Of course, they'd never heard a noise like that before. You didn't hear such a noise, you experienced it, endured it, survived it, witnessed it. You could fairly say that their lives could be divided into two. The period before they heard that noise, and the period after. It was a noise, but it was a transformation. It was a noise, but it was a confirmation. Something had happened. Something was happening. It was ongoing. The noise was confirmation, even as the noise was mystery. So I'm guessing this is like the noise attack that they hear in the movie. Understanding came after the fact. That was how life worked. I'm being hit by a car. I'm having a heart attack. That purple-gray thing emerging from between my legs is the head of our child. Epiphanies. They were the end of a chain of events invisible until that epiphany had been reached. You had to walk backward and try to make sense. That's what people did. That's how people learned. Yes. So, the thing was a noise. Not a bang, not a clap. More than thunder. More than an explosion. None of them had ever heard an explosion. Explosions seemed common because film so often depicted them. But explosions were rare. Or they'd all been lucky to be spared proximity to explosions. All that could be said in that moment was that it was a noise, big enough to alter forever their working definitions of noise. You'd cry if you weren't so scared. Surprised or affected in some way, impossible to understand. You might cry even so. The noise was quick, maybe, but the air buzzed with it for what seemed like a long time. What was the noise? And what was the noise after effect? One of those unanswerable questions. Amanda stood up. Besides them, the glass pane of the door between the bedroom and the deck cracked. A fine but long crack. Beautiful and mathematical. And something no one would ever notice for a while yet. The noise was loud enough to make a man fall to his knees. That's what Archie did. Distant, in the woods, fell to his bare knees. A noise that could make a person fall to their knees was only nominally a noise. It was something else for which there was no noun necessary. Because how often would one use such a word? What the fuck? This was, maybe, the only proper response. Amanda was not talking to George. She was not talking to anyone. What the fuck? She said it a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time. It didn't matter. She kept saying it, and it was unanswered, as a prayer. Amanda was trembling, not shaking, but shaking, vibrating. She went quiet. A noise so big, how could you meet it with silence? She thought what she was doing was screaming, the feeling of a scream, the emotion of a scream. But in fact, she gasped, like a fish flipped out of its pond. The noise deaf mutes make in moments of passion, the shadow, the silhouette of speech. Amanda was angry. What? She didn't feel any particular need to finish her sentence because she was talking to herself. What? 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 George had leapt from the tub, didn't even cover his body with a towel. Everything in the world was quiet except maybe the sense of afterglow, the void where the noise had only just been. Perhaps his ears were damaged, and it was an illusion. Perhaps her brain was damaged. There had been that story about consular employees in Havana who developed neurological symptoms believed to be linked to noise. It had never occurred to her that a weapon could be sonic. Had never occurred to her that a noise might be something to fear. You told kids and pets not to worry during thunderstorms. What she's referring to right there is Havana Syndrome. We'll actually get into that probably this episode. Amanda was shaking. There was a sharp taste, like she had a Kennedy $50 sitting on the top of her tongue. If she'd move, the noise might recur. If it did, she was not sure she would be able to bear it. She never wanted to hear it again. What was that? This was more to herself than anything. Was it localized inside the house with the parameter? Or was it something related to the weather or interstellar or the parting of the heavens to herald the arrival of God himself? As she asked, she knew that the noise would never be satisfactorily explained. It was past logic or explanation, at least. It was very slow at first. She'd walked, and then she leapt down the steps. She had just been looking out at the trees. She tried to find their bodies in all the green and brown. She should call for them, and it seemed like she did, but she did not. Her voice did not work, or couldn't catch up to her body. She just moved, slow, then fast, jogged, then run. Amanda went down past the pool, shoving open the gate, and into the grass. Her children, their perfect faces, their flawless bodies, were there, somewhere. She could see only the single mass of the landscape. It looked to her as it might had been nearsighted without her glasses, indistinct, bright, impossible. She ran farther. The yard was not so big. There was not so much to run into. Still, she did not call, only ran. There was a little shed in the shadows. She pulled open the door, and it was empty. All in one moment, she didn't truly stop running. She continued to the edge of the yard. Soft dirt and dry leaves. The noise was over, but there was still a noise. Her blood in her veins. Her heart resilient enough. She needed her children's bodies against her own. Amanda leapt over a stick, small enough that she could have stepped over it, and her feet were in the carpet of humus. Her catching a pebble, pointed bark, a thorn, something wet and unpleasant. She should call out to them, but she didn't want to drown out their voices, should they be calling to her. Urgent moms, as convicts were said to utter upon their executions. The kids were her kids. The kids, where were her kids? The trees barely seemed to move. They just stood indifferent to her. Amanda sank to the ground. The touch of leaves, bark, dirt was almost a comfort. The mud on her pink knees was almost a balm. The clean soles of her feet were blackened and pocked but not painful. At last she found herself. She had intended to call out for the children, to call out the names they'd chosen so lovingly, but instead of Archie and Rosie, for the diminutive would surely have emerged. Love and longing, Amanda only screamed, a terrible animal scream, the second most shocking noise she had ever heard. Alright, so Amanda was suspecting Havana Syndrome. What is Havana Syndrome? And could it really have sickened U.S. diplomats? One of the most puzzling scientific mysteries of the early 21st century is the so-called Havana Syndrome. The illness typically reported by U.S. diplomats and spies working abroad includes unusual physical symptoms that some believe are part of a campaign of electromagnetic harassment by outside actors. So, what is Havana Syndrome exactly? This harassment could harness the Frey effect, a known phenomenon in which electromagnetic energy can be used to induce similar physical effects in people. We look into the history of both. The origin of the Havana Syndrome. In late 2016, a year after the United States government reestablished diplomatic ties with Cuba, staff at the U.S. Embassy in Havana started reporting unusual illnesses. The symptoms included head pressure or vibration, dizziness followed in some cases by tinnitus, visual problems, vertigo, and cognitive difficulties. The symptoms were sometimes preceded by a loud noise and pain. Since then, U.S. diplomatic personnel and their families have reported at least 200 cases of what came to be known as Havana Syndrome, with attacks reported in Austria, Australia, Colombia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Poland, Russia, Serbia, Taiwan, and Uzbekistan. Some of those affected had only brief symptoms, while others reported serious neurological issues that impacted work, sleep, and daily living. The syndrome has variously been attributed to tropical crickets, the Zika virus, and even quote unquote mass hysteria. But because employees of the U.S. government had been the majority of those reporting the symptoms, the leading theory is that it was caused by a clandestine attack with an electromagnetic weapon. Results of investigations have been mixed. A 2020 report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine considered direct radio frequency, RF energy, the most relevant suspect. In January 2022, the CIA determined that most of the attacks were not conducted by a hostile power, instead citing environmental causes, medical conditions, or stress. Though in about 24 cases, it could not rule out foreign involvement. In February 2022, a separate panel of experts convened by the U.S. intelligence community concluded that Havana Syndrome was likely the result of pulsed electromagnetic energy delivered by a mechanical device. The Frey effect. In 1962, Alan H. Frey, a scientist at Cornell University, published a paper titled Human Auditory System Response to Modulated Electromagnetic Energy. According to the paper, Frey bombarded human subjects with low-powered RF energy. He determined the side of the skull behind the eyes was the spot most vulnerable to the energy. Once researchers turned on the energy, the perception of sounds was induced in test subjects. The effect was induced even when the human subject and the transmitter broadcasting the energy were thousands of feet apart. Frey noticed that the deaf subjects also heard the noises. Interesting. We can induce the perception of severe buffeting of the head without such apparent vestibular symptoms as dizziness or nausea. Changing transmitter parameters again, one can induce a pins and needles sensation, Frey claimed. Subjects reported a clicking, hiss, or knocking noise, depending on several transmitter parameters, an example, pulse width and pulse repetition rate, PRF for short. The sound always seemed to come from within or immediately behind the head, Frey reported. The paper theorized that there were one or more undiscovered radio frequency detection systems built in the human auditory system. A new weapon, perhaps? Frey never tested using RF energy in a harmful manner, as Havana Syndrome is seemingly designed. so there's no clear link between the two. There is some commonality in the symptoms, though. In one case, a syndrome experiencer noticed strange clicking noises and a strange van parked outside his home. The van suddenly drove away, and the individual began experiencing concussion-like symptoms. The Soviet Union was known to have conducted experiments in using RF energy as a weapon, both as strategic weapons and against diplomatic personnel assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in the 1970s. Individuals assigned to the agency did not report any immediate health effects, but many, according to NPR, came down with serious health issues years later. One interesting coincidence regarding the attacks was that they began in 2016, approximately 1 year after the U.S. restored diplomatic relations with Cuba during the Cold War. Cuba was considered a prized ally by the Soviet Union due to its proximity to the United States. Russian President Vladimir Putin's desire to restore the Soviet Union and its spheres of influence are well known. If Putin felt Cuba might drift away from Russia, he might order his intelligence services to undermine the work of newly arrived American diplomats in a way that doesn't lead a trail back to Moscow. The takeaway: reports of Havana Syndrome slowed as it gained publicity, with the latest reported incidents happening in Geneva and Paris in 2021. Is Havana Syndrome an attack created by a man-made device, a natural phenomenon, or a case of mass hysteria? If it is an attack, we have a possible explanation for how the machine works, a precedent, and political motive. Whatever is going on, it is complex enough that the U.S. intelligence agencies are unable to determine the cause, even as it happens to their own people. Alright, we'll do one more chapter and wrap it up for the day. They spoke more quietly than normal. They were deferential, of course, to the noise. They were waiting for it to come back. They didn't want to be caught unawares. But how could you anticipate that, even having heard it before? All the same, there was a disagreement. GH did not wholly believe what he was saying. It could have been thunder, I suppose. Sometimes you could will yourself to believe what you said. There are no clouds. Amanda's fury was blunted a bit by relief. She had found her children, wide-eyed and filthy as mendicants, and would not let them go. She had Rose's right hand in hers, as she used to years ago, when the girl was misbehaving. On the girl's left hand the palm was etched red, a perfect unbroken line. A braided skin on her left knee, smudges on her chin and shoulder and soft midriff. She campaigned for months for the two-piece swimsuit, and greasy hair and red eyes, but otherwise the girl was fine. The children looked fine. They seemed fine. Amanda had plunged headlong into the woods and found them by some instinct she'd forgotten she possessed. Or perhaps it was dumb luck. The noise sent the three of them running, and their paths happened to intersect. The noise saw Clay stop the car beside the maddening, emptying road. Open the door and consider the heavens. The noise startled Ruth, filling the coffee pot, dropping a spoon to the ground. The noise bade those deer, more than 1,000 in number, already heedless of the property lines drawn by men, to stampede through the gardens without even stopping for a nibble. Homeowners were too distracted by the shattered windows, by the screaming children, by the infant eardrums, irreparably affected, to gawk at all those animals. Amanda and the children emerged from the woods, and though they were strangers, there was real joy at their reunion. Ruth had put an arm around the boy's bare shoulders. GH had squeezed Amanda's forearm in paternal relief. The aftermath of the noise, a hum, a sense of vibration, seemed to linger. It was like a swarm of persistent insects, the biting flies you sometimes encountered at the beach. There and not there, dogged. Amanda suggested they go inside, articulating what everyone was feeling. The sky was quite blue and very pretty, but the out of doors seemed somehow untrustworthy. The noise seemed to belong to nature, but as Ruth knew, the bricks had not been enough to keep the sound away. Was that a bomb? Visions of mushroom clouds. Where's Dad? Regressing as you did after a trauma. Archie's voice broke, high and awkward, on Dad. Where was Dad? He ran an errand. Amanda was terse. I'm sure he'll be back any moment. Ruth filled glasses with water. The children were filthy and sweaty. She wasn't sure how to help, but that was what she wanted to do. She couldn't hold her grandchildren close. She could get this stranger's children a glass of water. Thank you. Archie remembered his manners. That was a good sign. Why don't you go wash? I can stay with Archie. Ruth bent down to pick up a dropped teaspoon with which she had been measuring the coffee grounds. She wanted to help, but mostly she wanted a distraction. Amanda took Rose to the bathroom, cleaned her wounds. They were minor. The ritual was a comfort to both of them. Damp toilet paper and neosporin. Her child's face close enough that she could smell her hot breath. After the genocide, beauty parlors helped Rwandans cope. Touching another human being was a curative. She swabbed the child's face with a damp washcloth, dressed her in a sweatshirt and shorts. Rose was no longer wanted to be seen naked, did not even protest that. The noise had terrified her. Ruth had to do something. Drink your water, sweetie. The blandishment did not come naturally. At school, they called every child friend. Even in trouble, they were not subjected to ma'am and sir, but friend. Friend, we need to talk about your behavior. Friends, please lower your voices. It was a wholly and non-committal way. Archie's hairless back was coated with paste of sweat and dust. You could have inscribed a word in the filth on his skin, the way pranksters wrote, "Wash me" on untended cars. Dutiful, he took a sip. My ears feel weird. It's probably normal. Ruth's ears didn't feel weird, but her everything else did. That was loud. It might have damaged their eardrums. Amanda had returned. The clean little girl holding her hand made a child again. Oh, Archie, you're a mess. She stroked his grimy back, reassured and reassuring. GH peered out of the window, suspicious of everything he could see. The pool, the rustling trees. That was all out there. That was all he could see. But he wasn't expecting to see... What? A bomb? A missile? Were those the same thing? Was it a plane? Amanda was trying to reconstruct it, but a noise was like pain. Your body couldn't remember its specifics. It might have been mechanical, and planes seemed the highest form of machine. A plane crashing? Ruth didn't know if it was what she meant, and couldn't guess what sort of sound it would make. A plane exploding, like that one over Lockerbie, or felled like that one that was destined for the U.S. Capitol. Again, she only had Hollywood films. Or breaking the sound barrier. A sonic boom. Was that a sonic boom? They had flown on the Concorde once. A lark, their 15th anniversary. Francois Mitterrand had been on their flight. I think you can't break the sound barrier when you're over land, but it gets lost over the ocean. I think that's right. Planes don't usually break the sound barrier. Archer had done a report on it in the 6th grade. The Concorde doesn't fly anymore. He was right in that the Concorde had only ever terrified the whales in the North Atlantic, but these were extraordinary times. He didn't know that the planes dispatched from Rome, New York, usually flew north, the most direct route to an open sea. But they were off to intercept something that approached the nation's eastern flank. The circumference of the noise they created was about 50 miles, a rend in the heaven right over their little house. Ruth had thought of it over their repast of strange sandwiches. I noticed today, did you? There was no air traffic. Not one plane, not one helicopter. G.H. knew, as his wife said it. That was true. You're right. I mean, usually we hear so many. Planes, helicopters. What do you mean? Amanda asked. There must have been hobbyists taking lessons. Impatient people flying out from Manhattan. It's a big issue in local op-eds. Ruth herself had become inured enough to the noise pollution that she noticed, instead, its absence. She didn't know what this meant, but thought it might mean something. Amanda wanted to send the children out of the room, but there was no television to distract them. Archie, why don't you go put your clothes on? Her hand was on his gritty back. He was hot to the touch. Drink more water. Maybe you should take a shower. Ruth understood. Maybe any parent would. Rose, maybe you should go lie down. The girl didn't know if this strange woman was meant to be obeyed. She looked up at her mother to see what to do. That's a good idea, honey. Amanda was grateful. Go curl up in Mommy's bed. Read your book. I'm going to take a shower. Archie was suddenly conscious of being undressed. He couldn't confess this, but he'd pissed in his swimsuit when he heard that noise, like a baby. There was a point, when he was younger, where he'd dreamed of understanding grown-up conversation. Now he could, and realized he'd overestimated it. Come on, Rose. A big brother's kindness. Amanda waited until the children were gone. What was that? Ruth looked past her husband to the window, the flat blue sky. It's not the weather. Ideal day for swimming. And anyway, there had never been thunder so loud that lasted so long. If they lived in Hawaii, she might have said it was a volcano. G.H. was impatient. He was done with this. We can agree that we don't know what it is, he said. Where is Clay? Amanda looked at Ruth as though the woman were responsible. As the noise changed the girl from teen to child, it left Amanda soft, helpless. Ruth had lost track of the time. It wasn't so long ago, it just feels that way. He'll be back soon. G.H. was making promises. This settles it, though. Something is happening. The lack of a cellular signal was an assault. The absence of television was a tactic. We have to do something. What shall we do, sweetie? Ruth didn't disagree, but she was at a loss. We're being attacked. This is an attack. What are you supposed to do in the event of an attack? We're not being attacked. G.H. was not entirely certain, though, and it showed. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed? Amanda was louder. We're just sitting here like I don't know what. Is that what sitting ducks are? Ducks just sitting and waiting to be shot? What a stupid expression. Why would a duck sit? I mean, we still don't know what's happening. We should just wait for Clay to come back and we'll see what he's learned. Should I drive into town and look for Clay? She didn't want to leave the house, but she would. Something had to be done. Should we fill the bathtubs? Do we have batteries and Tylenol? Should we find the neighbors? Is there enough food? Is this an emergency? G.H. put his brown hands on the Vermont stone countertops. This is an emergency. We are prepared, and we are safe here. Those were the facts. His energy bars, his case of wine. Is there a generator? Is there a bomb shelter? Is there, I don't know, a hand crank radio? One of those straws that make it safe to drink dirty water? He'll be back soon, I'm sure. GH was trying to convince himself as well. We'll stay here. We're safe here. All of us will stay here. It's 15 minutes to town. The 15 minutes back. That's half an hour at least. Ruth fidgeted. What were they doing? Maybe it's longer if you don't know the way. Maybe it's 20 minutes. 40 there and back. Amanda was mad at all of them. What if he's not coming back? What if the car died? Or that noise did something to him? Or did she envision Clay gone forever? George is right. We are safe. Let's just sit tight. How can you say we are safe when you don't know what's happening to us? Amanda hoped the children could not hear her. She wept now. We heard that noise. Ruth was logical. We should just wait to see what we are going to have to do next. Amanda was furious. We don't have the internet. We don't have our phones. We don't have what anything is. We don't know what anything is. She blamed it on these people. They'd knocked on the door and ruined everything. Maybe it was like, what was that, 10 Mile Island? Ruth wanted a drink, but couldn't decide if this was a good idea. There are power plants out here, aren't there? 3 Mile Island. GH always knew that sort of thing. Amanda knew it from history books. A nuclear accident? The abiding fear of her youth. Presidential red telephones, flashes of light, fallout. She'd forgotten all that at some point. Oh my God. Should we tape the windows shut? Are we going to get sick? I don't know. I don't know that would account for the noise, GH tried to remember. The steam was produced by the seawater used to cool the material that produced the reaction that created the energy. An earthquake in Japan had showed the fallacy. Seawater could flow back, poison could travel across the ocean. They'd found debris in Oregon. Would a nuclear incident make such a noise? Did the nuclear plants out here supply the city? And would their damage account for the blackout? A missile? Amanda was thinking out loud. North Korea. Ruth, you brought up North Korea. Iran. GH said it without meaning to. Iran? Amanda said it like she'd never heard of the place. We shouldn't speculate. GH regretted it. Maybe this was, the blackout then, the source of the noise, a bomb or whatever. Terrorists were planners. The action itself felt like impulse because televisions couldn't show what preceded it. Meetings, strategies, sketches, money. Those 19 had practiced in flight simulators. Where would you even find a flight simulator? Ha! The 19 hijackers, yeah, right. We're just getting worked up. GH felt it was important to stick to whatever they could see. Ruth would have a drink. She found the wine key. She went to the cabinet and took out a Cabernet. But, Clay, what if he found something? What was worse, he was not coming back. Or he was, and had found something out in the world truly unbearable. Worse than they were able to even guess at, and had to come back with news of it and force these people to bear it with him. Amanda wept more now. But we won't know what's happening until we do. She looked at the pendant lamps. New, but made to look like something from a turn-of-the-century schoolhouse. At the clever cabinetry that concealed the stainless steel dishwasher, at the milk glass bowl full of lemons, the house had seemed so alluring. It didn't feel safe anymore. It didn't feel the same. Nothing did. Maybe the television will come back on. Ruth tried to sound optimistic. Or our cell phones will work again. Amanda said it like a prayer. She looked down at the countertop, noticing, maybe for the first time, the beautiful abstraction of stone. It didn't seem strong or solid, but it did seem newly beautiful. That was something. So that's all today. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you all for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe, and check out our other Leave the World Behind episodes. See you guys later.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.